If you want to know a man, you take a look at what he does, where he lives, what his friends say about him, and what he himself believes.
Freedom has its life in the heart, the actions, the spirit of man. It must be daily earned and refreshed, else like a flower cut from its life-giving roots, it will wither and die.
That is the voice of Dwight D. Eisenhower, general to some, statesman to others, and Ike to those who know him. Our story begins in the small town of Abilene, Kansas. Population 6,000. It's a quiet little town today, clean, modern, a pleasant place to live. But back in the 80s, before Ike was born, Abilene was famous for an entirely different reason.
Abilene was the end of the Texas cattle trail. Way back into the 80s, we became quite a rough little city in those days, and they had to finally bring in Wild Bill Hickok to restore peace and order. But since that time, we've been a very, very calm city indeed.
That's Henry Jameson, publisher of the town's only newspaper. Henry remembers back to 1892 when the Eisenhowers moved to Abilene and settled in the south side of town on the other side of the railroad tracks. That's the actual sound of the train that runs in front of the Eisenhower home. Nobody lives in that house today, but Earl Endicott likes to show the property to tourists, tell them about the kitchen and bedrooms and furniture. Even the books the boys read are still in that house. The high school album and Ike's West Point manual and the family Bible which recorded the births and deaths of the Eisenhowers.
You'll notice at the bottom of the page is the general's birth date given as October the 14th, 1890 at Denison, Texas. And his name is listed in the book as D. Dwight Eisenhower, not Dwight D. as he writes it today.
Nobody in the south side of Abilene had much money in those days, and the Eisenhowers had less than most. Newspaperman Charlie Harger, for all his 90-odd years, has a good many memories stored up about the boys and their parents.
Their father and mother were a quiet couple. The father, I suppose, never earned more than $1,500 a year in his life. And his wife was a frail little woman, sweet and lovely. And she just worshipped those boys because they worshipped her. And it made a happy family.
If you were a boy and you grew up with Ike, you'd know why the family got on so well.
Well, I'm Six McDonald. I'm a printer by trade. And I grew up in Abilene with Dwight D. Eisenhower.
And the thing Six remembers best was the way Ike used to make the most of everything, even in those days.
I can recall when Dwight and that's Ike, of course, and Ed both used to go around the neighborhood with a little boy's wagon full of vegetables, selling it from house to house. And in those days, you could get a basket full of that stuff for a nickel. And maybe they would peddle that stuff for a couple of hours and go home with 35 or 40 cents. These are vegetables that were raised in their own backyard, you know.
New Year's Eve, 1899. As the tired old century drew to a close, all the Eisenhowers were together under one roof. David, Ida, and the 6 boys. Arthur, the oldest, was 13. Milton, the youngest, was just an infant. In between, there was Edgar, Dwight, Earl, and Roy. At the turn of the century, the Spanish-American War had just ended, and in the Philippines, an insurrection was raging. But in Abilene that night, all was quiet. Not even in their boys' imagination could the brothers know that one of them, the 9-year-old Ike, would someday be spoken about by a famous president of the United States.
I spent many hours in Casablanca with this young general, a descendant of Kansas pioneers. I know what a fine, tough job he has done. I want to say to you tonight and to him that we have every confidence in his leadership.
That was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who in 1943 hailed Dwight Eisenhower as the young general, a descendant of Kansas pioneers. That's the actual sound of the clock on the mantel of the Eisenhower home. It measured the hours for the baking of bread, the days as President McKinley lay dying of an assassin's bullet, and the split second as Marconi in 1901 flashed a wireless signal across the Atlantic. For the 11-year-old Ike, the family clock measured time for work, for school, and for play.